Hey everyone, welcome to Creepy History. I'm Shane. In the 1920s, if you walked past a certain factory late at night, you might catch something strange out of the corner of your eye. The young women leaving their shift, they were glowing. Their hair shimmered with a faint green light. Their hands, the dust on their clothes. They left a soft, ghostly trail behind them in the dark. They called themselves the Ghost Girls, and they thought it was beautiful. They painted it on their nails to surprise their boyfriends. They dabbed it on their teeth so their smiles would glow when the lights went out. They'd been told the paint was perfectly safe enough, their bosses said, to swallow. Within a few years, some of these women would be dead. Their jaws would crumble in their dentist's hands. Their bones would fill with holes. And the company that did this to them, the company that watched it happen, knew the truth the entire time. This is the story of the Radium Girls. To understand how this happened, you have to understand what radium meant in 1917. Radium had been discovered less than 20 years earlier by Marie and Pierre Curie. And in those first decades, the world was absolutely intoxicated by it. This was a substance that glowed on its own, with no battery, no flame, no power source. It seemed to give off energy out of nothing. To people at the time, it didn't feel dangerous, it felt magical. So they put it in everything. Radium toothpaste, promising a brighter smile. Radium face cream for a youthful glow. Radium water, sold as a health tonic. There were radium chocolate bars. People drank it, rubbed it on their skin, and believed it was making them healthier. And then came the First World War, and radium found a new purpose. Soldiers in the trenches needed to read their watches and their instrument dials in the dark, without striking a light that would give away their position. The answer was a glowing paint made by mixing radium powder into a clear adhesive. Brush it onto the numbers of a watch face, and they would shine through the blackest night. Someone had to paint those tiny numbers, and the work was delicate, far too delicate for machines. It needed small, steady, patient hands. It needed young women. The United States Radium Corporation set up a studio in Orange, New Jersey. A rival company, the Radium Dial Company, opened in Ottawa, Illinois. Between them and the other firms in the trade, they hired thousands of young women over the years, most of them between about 18 and 25, some of them still in their teens. For a working-class girl in that era, this was the job. The pay was extraordinary, more than 3 times what a typical factory worker earned. The work was clean and respectable. You sat at a bright table with other girls your age, you chatted and laughed, and you painted. Sisters worked alongside sisters, best friends got hired together. Families were proud to have a daughter who was a dial painter. They felt lucky. They were the lucky ones. And it wasn't just the factory girls who trusted radium. To see how completely the country had fallen for it, you only have to look at a wealthy man named Eben Byers. Byers was a Pittsburgh industrialist, a Yale graduate, and a champion amateur golfer. He won the U.S. amateur title in 1906. He had money, status, everything. In 1927, he hurt his arm, and a doctor recommended a tonic called Radithor. Radium dissolved in water, sold in little bottles as a cure-all, advertised as perpetual sunshine. A cure, the ad said, for the living dead. Byers loved it. He said it made him feel wonderful. So he didn't drink 1 bottle, or 10. Over the next few years, Eben Byers drank around 1,400 bottles of radioactive water. He gave it to his friends. He gave it to his girlfriends. He even fed it to his racehorses. By 1930, his jaw was disintegrating. Surgeons removed most of his upper and lower jaw. Holes were opening in his skull. An investigator sent to interview him wrote that the whole experience was as gruesome as anything he could imagine, in as gorgeous a setting as he could imagine. Byers died in 1932. The Wall Street Journal ran the story under a headline that has outlived almost everyone involved. The radium water worked fine, until his jaw came off. He was buried in a coffin lined with lead, and when his body was dug up decades later in 1965 so scientists could study it, his bones were still intensely radioactive. He's still, to this day, glowing quietly inside a lead box in a Pittsburgh cemetery. Remember that, because that's a grown man who simply drank the stuff. Now think about the young women who every single working day were putting it directly into their mouths, on purpose, because they'd been told to. The numbers on a watch dial are tiny. To paint them cleanly, you needed a brush with a perfect fine point, and after a few strokes, the bristles of a camel hair brush would naturally splay out and lose their shape. So the women were taught a technique. To reform the point, they would slip the brush between their lips and give it a little twist. Lip, dip, paint. Wet the brush in your mouth, dip it in the radium, paint the number. Lip, dip, paint. Hundreds of times a day. Day after day, year after year. Every single time a brush touched their lips, they swallowed a tiny amount of radium. Some of the women asked about it. They asked their supervisors point blank, "Is this safe? Should I really be putting this in my mouth?" And they were reassured every time. It's harmless. If anything, it's good for you. It'll put roses in your cheek. So they didn't worry. Why would they? They were young and the paint was beautiful and the company doctors weren't concerned. The girls leaned into it. On their breaks, they painted their fingernails with the glowing paint. They painted their teeth before a night out so they'd flash a glowing grin on the dance floor. One woman painted it over her whole face in the dark just to see. They went home dusted in it and glowed in their own beds. Here's the part that turns this from a tragedy into something darker. The dangers of radium were not a secret, not to scientists, and not to the men who ran these companies. By this time, researchers already knew that radium could burn skin and destroy tissue. The owner of US Radium held a doctorate in chemistry. The company's own chemists and executives handled radium with extreme care. In the laboratory, the scientists used lead screens to shield themselves. They handled the material with ivory-tipped tongs and tweezers, careful never to let it touch their skin. They wore protective gear. And in the very same building, the young women they employed were putting the brushes in their mouths, hundreds of times a day, because nobody told them not to. It started for many of them with a toothache. The first of them to die was a young woman named Mollie Maggia. In 1921, Mollie developed an aching tooth. Her dentist pulled it, but the spot wouldn't heal. Instead, painful ulcers spread through her mouth. Then the ache moved into her jaw. When her dentist examined her, he reached into her mouth and her jawbone simply came away against his fingers. He lifted it out, not with surgery, just his hand. A few days later, much of the rest of her lower jaw came out the same way. The decay kept spreading. It moved into the tissues of her throat, and on September the 12th, 1922, it reached the blood vessels there and Mollie hemorrhaged. She choked to death on her own blood. She was 24 years old. And here's the detail you should hold on to. On Mollie Maggia's death certificate, the cause of death was not listed as radium poisoning. It was listed as syphilis. Even in death, the story they told about her was a lie designed to shame her, to make people assume she'd brought it on herself rather than admit what the paint had done. She was the first. She would be very far from the last. For the others, the pattern was the same, and it always seemed to begin small. A dull, persistent ache in the jaw that wouldn't go away. A tooth that loosened for no reason. When a dentist removed the bad tooth, the socket wouldn't heal. Instead, it festered, an open, aching sore that refused to close. Then it got worse. When one woman's dentist reached into her mouth to examine her jaw, a piece of the jawbone simply broke away in his fingers. It had rotted from the inside. Doctors began to see it again and again, and they gave it a name. They called it radium jaw. The radium these women had been swallowing behaves in the body almost exactly like calcium, and your body takes calcium and deposits it into your bones. So the radium settled into their bones, their jaws, their spines, their hips, their legs, and there it stayed. And it never stopped giving off radiation. From the inside, day and night, it slowly drilled the bone full of microscopic holes, eating them alive from within. Women in their 20s developed the spines of the elderly. Some grew shorter inch by inch as their backbones collapsed. Legs broke under the simple weight of standing. One woman's leg shattered while she was walking across a room. Tumors grew, anemia set in, severe and unrelenting, because the radiation was destroying the marrow where blood is made. And they were so young. These were women in the prime of their lives who had been healthy and laughing at a painting table just a few years before. When the women, sick and frightened, came back to the companies for answers, they did not get sympathy. They got a wall. The companies hired their own doctors to examine the women, and then buried or distorted the findings. When investigators got close to the truth, results were withheld. And in one of the cruelest moves of the entire story, the companies spread a rumor about the dying women, that what they really had was syphilis, a way to shame them into silence, to make people look away, to suggest these women had brought it on themselves through their own immorality, rather than through the job they'd been hired to do. Meanwhile, the women kept dying, and no one in power would admit why. In New Jersey, a woman named Grace Fryer decided she was not going to stay quiet. Grace had started at the U.S. Radium plant in 1917 at 18, 4 days after America entered the war. She had 2 brothers in uniform and wanted to do her part. She later left for a better job at a bank. There's a moment people remember about Grace. One day at the bank, feeling congested, she stepped away to blow her nose, and when she looked at her handkerchief in the dim light, it was glowing. The radium was coming out of her years later from the inside. Then her teeth began to loosen, and her back began to give out, and she learned what was happening to the other girls she'd worked beside. She decided to sue the United States Radium Corporation, and she discovered just how alone she was. It took her 2 years just to find a lawyer willing to take the case. A young attorney named Raymond Berry finally agreed. The statute of limitations was working against them. Under New Jersey law, they'd had only 2 years to file, and their symptoms hadn't even appeared until long after that. The law itself seemed to be on the company's side. The companies had money and lawyers and time. The women had none of those things. What they had was running out fast. Grace was joined by 4 other women from the New Jersey plant: Quinta McDonald, Albina Larice, Edna Hussman, and Catherine Schaub. The newspapers, when they finally paid attention, gave them a name that said everything about their situation. One headline called them the case of the 5 women doomed to die. They called them the Radium Girls. And out in Illinois, the women dying from the Ottawa plant earned a name even grimmer: the Society of the Living Dead. By the time the case finally reached a hearing, the women were so ill that the courtroom itself became evidence of the crime. They could not raise their arms high enough to take the oath. Some could barely sit upright. One of them was confined to bed and could not attend at all. They were dying in front of everyone, visibly, undeniably, and they used what little strength and time they had left to make sure someone would be held responsible. That first hearing in New Jersey came in 1928. In the end, with the women too sick to wait years for a verdict, the New Jersey 5 settled out of court, taking what they could while they were still alive to use it. It was not the clean courtroom victory they deserved. But their story had broken into the national press, and it lit the fuse for everything that followed. The real legal landmark would come a decade later, out in Illinois. The woman at the center of that Illinois fight was named Catherine Donohue. She'd painted dials in Ottawa, and by the time the case came to a hearing in 1938, the radium had reduced her to about 70 pounds. She was a wife and a mother of 2, and she was dying in front of her whole town. At one hearing, she brought with her a small box. Inside it were fragments of bone, pieces of her own jaw that had come loose and fallen out of her face. She offered them to the commission as evidence. During the proceedings, a doctor was asked, in front of her, what her chances of recovery were. Hearing the answer confirmed aloud, Catherine collapsed from her chair. Men had to carry her out of the room, and at 71 pounds, she was no weight at all. She was too weak to keep traveling to the hearings, so the trial was moved to her home, and she gave testimony from her bed. Her lawyer told the commission that the radium inside her would go on, even after she was gone, to bombard through her very casket, just as it had wrecked her jaw and her hip. Catherine won her case, and then the company appealed, and she won again. By some counts, she won in the end 7 times over, as the company fought it all the way to the Supreme Court, which refused to take it up. Catherine Donohue died on July the 27th, 1938, just days after a final ruling in her favor. Her widower, bankrupted by her medical bills, eventually received a fraction of what her care had cost. But the precedent her dying body had forced into law would protect millions of workers who came after her. Many of the Radium Girls did not live to see the full impact of what they'd done. The radium in their bones had already written the ending of their stories, but what they accomplished outlived all of them. Their fight helped establish the right of workers to sue employers for damage done to their health on the job. It pushed forward the creation of real occupational safety standards. The data gathered from their suffering, and there was a great deal of it, became some of the most important early evidence about what radiation does to the human body over time. That knowledge mattered enormously. Just a few years later, scientists working on the atomic bomb and on nuclear energy would rely on safety limits that were informed, in part, by what had happened to a few hundred young women at a watch painting table. People who will never know their names are alive today because of what these women endured. They did not die for nothing, but they should never have had to die at all. There's one last thing, and it's the detail that, once you know it, you never quite shake. The radium that settled into these women's bones is still there. Radium does not simply burn out and vanish. It decays over a span of time almost impossible to imagine. Its half-life is roughly 1,600 years, which means that when researchers, decades later, located and exhumed the remains of some of the Radium Girls, their bones still set off the radiation detectors. They were still glowing in their own way long after death, and they will go on giving off radiation in the ground for over 1,000 years, long after everyone who ever knew them is gone, and long after the watches they painted have stopped ticking. The ghost girls are still glowing. They just can't tell us about it anymore. That was the story of the Radium Girls. If history this dark is your thing, follow Creepy History wherever you're listening right now, so the next one finds you automatically. And if you've got a minute, leave a rating. It's the single biggest thing that helps a small show like this one reach more people. I'm Shane Cohen. Thanks for listening.